When Titan was canceled, I mean, that must have been a gigantic heartbreak for everybody. And there was this moment when the plan was for the Titan team to be disbanded and moved elsewhere, but you fought for keeping some part of the Titan team, the core of the team, together. And Mike Morheim gave you 6 weeks to come up with a pitch for a new game. And you've talked about this process. And you've mentioned that there are 3 possible ideas, directions you're thinking about: a Starcraft MMO, maybe an MMO in a new IP called Crossworlds, and then the third idea was Overwatch. Can you take me through those 6 weeks?
Yeah, the 6 weeks, it was supposed to be the greatest time ever if you think about it, because you're a game developer at Blizzard and you get to come up with a new idea.
Mm-hmm.
So that sounds awesome. Like, to everybody at Blizzard, to all game developers, it sounds great. But we were probably the most demoralized we'd ever been in our careers. At least I was. I didn't know if I was going to be fired. I didn't know if that was the end of my career at that point. And so it was like a really serious, kind of dire environment that this was happening in. And we were given 2 criteria that we had to hit for these pitches. The first one was that we had to ship within 2 years. And that is a very ambitious time frame for
crazy.
any game.
That's crazy.
But for a Blizzard game, it's kind of insane.
Yeah.
And then the second, okay, the second is even more ambitious and crazy, was whatever we made, whatever we pitched, had to have the potential to have World of Warcraft like revenue.
Yeah. Right.
And to date, at that point, there was one game that had World of Warcraft like revenue, which was World of Warcraft. So immediately I just threw out the revenue thing, because it's all fucking monopoly money to me.
Yeah.
Like, this game money it's insane, and I just don't think about it. That's someone else's problem. But I did want to be as realistic as I could about the schedule part of it. So most of our team, the Titan team, was 140 some people. Most of that team got moved to go work on Heroes of the Storm, the D3 expansion, World of Warcraft, Hearthstone. So immediately, large number of the team was gone. Then we had a bunch of, like, what we called temp loans, people that someday were going to come back to us, but we loaned off for like 6-month tour of duty. And then there was a very small team. There was a group of engineers that was mothballing Titan. So it exists somewhere at Blizzard at that point. And they were also deconstructing the engine because they knew it didn't work anymore. And to make a new game, it had to be way reconsidered to sort of what it is today. And then there was a very small creative group that was supposed to come up with these 3 pitches and given 6 weeks. And we just sort of arbitrarily decided, like, let's spend 2 weeks on each pitch. The ground rules that I sort of led with is you have to be all in for the 2 weeks on the pitch. So if pitch 1 was a Starcraft MMO, and we have to live and breathe and want it more than anything. And I kind of warned everybody. I said, at the end of this 2 weeks, you're going to think this is the only game idea, and you're not going to be invested in the next, but we're going to throw it out as soon as we finish it and do the next one. And the Starcraft MMO, I actually really loved that pitch. It was called Starcraft Frontiers. And the concept was, like, less of you're playing like Space Marine, like it was less armies. Starcraft, the RTS, is always about the 3 races and the giant armies. And kind of what made WoW and separate from the Warcraft RTS series was that instead of being like a footman in the army in World of Warcraft, you were like a lone adventurer, make your mark on the world. So we had this idea. It was this old Chris Metzen drawing of a space prospector. And I love that idea that, like, somewhere out in, like, where all the giant StarCraft battles were happening, thousands of Zerg and Protoss and Terran, there's like this like lone prospector on some planet, like going through like a mysterious dungeon, looking for minerals but finding monsters. Like it was that kind of spirit of
That's awesome.
more on the ground level.
I didn't even think about that because my intuition with Starcraft MMO would be the soldier as part of the army, right? The prospector. That's such a beautiful vision. Yeah.
Yeah,
Looking for the resources and on the way finding the monsters.
you want to be on the ground, like what's it like on the ground floor? And I don't want to be a minion in a giant army. I want to be Indiana Jones in space,
Nice.
So then there was this Metzen picture of the prospector, and then two of the most amazing artists, Arnold Sang and Peter Lee. Arnold's the great character artist. Peter Lee's the great environment artist. They did this concept art for Frontiers that was Metzen's space prospector. He's smoking a cigar and he's got his foot on a Hydralisk skull.
Nice.
And then there's like a med vac in the background and they're on this like big alien planet. And like that picture, you just wanted to like, here's my money, I'll pre-order now. Like sign me up for that game. That picture ended up being McCree from Overwatch. We redid it.
Nice.
But yeah, that was where McCree actually came from. So that was the Starcraft Frontiers idea. We kind of we went all in on the design. We had a world design, we had class design, like how the classes would work, what progression might look like, and you also have to think when you're trying to design an MMO, like what could expansions and live content be like. And we put together a really good pitch. We all knew there's no way you can make this game. Like this, even though it was more focused than Titan, it's 5 years on Blizzard's best day with nothing going wrong. In perfect scenario, 5 years to make that game. Probably with, 150 to 200 people. Like these 40 people are not making that game in 2 years. So as much as again, that was an idea, not a vision, because it lacked the path to reality,
Because that's a legit large-scale MMO in a world that you haven't quite developed in the way that an MMO needs. It was really crafted for the real-time strategy formulation of StarCraft, and it's in space. It would take. I mean, it would be incredible, but it would be a 5 year and realistically even more.
Like an endless thing that you'd spin on that team. You're making the StarCraft game. How do you get from planet to planet? Is it a cutscene? No one's going to want a cutscene, but we should probably make it a cutscene because that's easy. But we got to have space flight. That you're adding like 3 years just by saying we got to have space flight.
You are, yeah.
And then how do you make a space game without space flight? We've all played them. We know those games. So
are you essentially, when you're brainstorming like that, and by the way, it's such an incredible thing, for 2 weeks, you're just really falling in love with the game altogether and trying to figure out if it's actually possible. So if you're developing that, are you just constantly trying to say, like, what is the simplest possible thing we could do that's a complete world? Like, are you constantly trying to simplify, or are you allowing yourself to go big?
So when you're brainstorming and you're with the team and you're the creative leader, it's, guys, what's fucking amazing? What's big? What do players need? There's a Blizzard design value called what is the fantasy? What is the fantasy? You want to be in space. You want to be in the StarCraft universe. And then your job as the game director, and if you have a great creative director, art director, tech director, the director should be scoping it back into reality. The mistake I see on a lot of game teams is scope becomes a production problem. You give it to the project managers or the executives or the producers to say, no, there's not enough time, or you guys should hire more. Because,
right,
like, what do executives, what do those types have at their disposal that they can hit you with meetings in Outlook and tell you that you can hire more people? That's not really how you get the game made.
That's why they get paid the big bucks.
The scoping, your best case scenario is when your tech director, art director, and game director are doing the scoping. Because then like this part we got to spend big bucks on. There's no getting around it. This part we can cheat. If you have a giant team and one guy's job is just to make props, crates and chairs, the guy's going to make that's a AAA awesome developer who's going to put his heart and soul into it. If you let him, he'll take 6 weeks to make a crate. You have to have that moment where you're like, I kind of need 200 crates. So just spend like a couple hours on that one. And that's a hard thing to say to somebody.
You're doing this kind of scope carving while also talking about what is the fantasy. So there's a tension there that you're constantly dancing with. So you're allowing yourself to think big, but then scoping it down and doing that on a scale of days in this case? Like,
yeah, we had 2 weeks. So, and I don't think I was working on weekends, but we weren't getting the group together. So it's, like 10 working days.
And then you like shut it off and go to idea number 2?
Yeah. Idea number 2 was Crossworlds. That was a Metzen vision for a universe. And like, I'm glad Metzen's back at Blizzard, and I hope they make this game someday. The way Chris described it was there's a planet on the edge of the universe that's like the Mos Eisley spaceport with all these, freakish aliens and people from all walks of life. And it's kind of seedy and criminal. And there's traders and smugglers and diplomats. But this one planet is sort of the planet that they've agreed to like meet on. And this is like the neutral place. And then the game was going to take place on that planet. So
this is awesome.
Yeah. So that was more of like a world IP driven one that was really inspired by Chris.
And that allows you to play with different characters, I like that. I like that idea a lot because it's the meeting place of different worlds, and then you can allow your imagination to drive what the worlds from which they came from are like. So you don't have to design those worlds.
No, you don't have to design them, but then they're yours. Like if the players really are reacting to like the green people planet or whatever, and someday you're like, hey, what expansion should we make? I don't know, green people planet.
Yeah.
Like, let's do it.
I like it.
So it was actually it was Crossworlds. We were working on Crossworlds, and like the Starcraft Frontiers, for Frontiers, we were having the class meetings, how class progression worked, like the game designery stuff. And on Crossworlds, we were having a class meeting of like a big decision in like RPG type games is always, are you doing like skill based or class based? And it's usually some combination of those. But class based, you're like choosing, I'm going to be a warrior, therefore I use sword and shield, and I do these things. Where more of a skill base is everybody's kind of an avatar, and then the skills that you pick define. So I might take that I know how to use swords. So you're kind of making those decisions. And with all things game design, there's no right or wrong. It's all trade-offs. So the trade-off decision we were making is like, oh, I think we want to be class-based with this Crossworlds thing. And we were in a design meeting, and one of my favorite designers of all time is a guy named Jeff Goodman. He was one of the original WoW encounter designers. He designed like Onyxia and all the big raid bosses. Like if someone has a favorite raid boss, Jeff probably designed it. And he just kind of off the cuff said in this meeting, he said, I wish instead of making like 6 classes, I wish we could make 50 classes. And I wish instead of having like, 100 abilities on the classes, the 50 classes all just had like 1 or 2 things that was really interesting about them. And then the class meeting ended, like we designed our 6 classes in that meeting. And then the meeting ended, and I was back at my desk, and it just stuck with me what Jeff had said about the way he wished he could design the classes. And then I also we had this directory of all the amazing Titan art.
Mhm.
And I started pulling up Arnold Sang's characters. Arnold's vision and his art is second to none. And I started taking some of the old Titan characters that we had designed. We had a class called the Jumper, and the Jumper could like teleport forward and rewind time and come back. And the Jumper used dual wield pistols, which was at the time designed after my dual G18s from Modern Warfare 2 was my favorite loadout.
Uh-huh.
I was just cribbing Infinity Ward. That's where Tracer's guns came from.
Mhm.
And we had all these like different guns, like some that bloomed and some that, had this like really crazy recoil. And we had other types of guns. And I took every version of like the Titan Jumper and I just distilled it into what I thought was the best version of the Jumper, which was, the dual wield pistols, the blink, the recall, and time bomb. And then I took Arnold Sang art and I went, to Arnold and I'm like, what if this wasn't like a class? Who is this as a person, not a class? And Arnold, oh, what if she's British and her name's Tracer? And like, that was the origin of Overwatch. And some of the pragmatic part of that was I knew that Jeff Goodman was going to be on this team. And I knew that Arnold Sang was going to be on this team. And it's a play to your strengths moment. Like, what could we make in 2 years with the talent we have? And what is realistic? Like, what could we realistically make?
Mhm.
And so then I just sat there and I sort of, I went through a bunch of Titan classes. With a guy named the Gun Jack who became Reaper. We had actually the Ranger got split out and became 76 and became Bastion of all things.
You're describing the game of Overwatch where exactly that vision from that meeting came
Yes.
to life for you, as opposed to having a small number of classes with a large number of skills. You have a large number of heroes with each their distinct look, distinct set of skills.
Yeah, and the personality was a big part of it, like capturing this isn't some generic the Jumper, it's this person, Lena Oxton,
Mhm.
and she has a life and we're gonna, you know, make you interested in her.
Yeah, there's like a deep backstory. And that's also what's interesting about Overwatch is that backstory is not like revealed in a direct way. It's like seeps in indirectly throughout the game. So the backstory is implied
Yeah.
almost, and it's told not directly. So there's a lot of ideas like this, and so this is the thing that the team converged to.
Yeah. Well, and it was funny because like we're having these Crossworld, like people are, writing design docs and doing concept art for Crossworld. And, we'd have some brainstorm meetings every day. And I put together, it was a 7-page deck, Overwatch deck. And it was called Monetized Shooter at the time.
Yeah.
And it just said Monetized Shooter. And then the first slide was League of Legends plus Team Fortress 2 logos.
Yeah.
And then I had like 6 heroes like sloppily designed. And as everybody was working on Crossworlds, um, there were 2, co-leaders of that Team 4. There was, Chris Metzen was there and Ray Gresco. And I remember Ray coming over. Ray is like a phenomenal game developer of all time. He like wrote the Dark Forces engine, was the production director on Diablo 3. He and I killed Titan. And then he's at my desk looking over my shoulder and he's like, "Well, what are you working on? Is this the Crossworlds pitch?" And I'm like, "No, this is like another idea that I'm just working on the side." And I show him the 7 slides and he just looks at me and he says, "Go show Metzen this. This is what we should make instead." And then I went and I showed Metzen, like, hey, this is just an idea. And then Metzen was like, yes, like, this is what we should make.
Yeah.
And I showed Arnold, and it was Arnold's art. And then Ray tells me, he's like, because every morning we get the team together, because we were in this like dire straits, and we're midway through at that point. And Ray and a producer named Matt Hawley said, tomorrow morning at the meeting, you're going to pitch this monetized shooter idea. It was called monetized shooter because originally when I pitched it, it was free to play and you had to buy the heroes, which is fucking terrible. But at the time, I actually thought that was a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm walking down the hall with Matt Hawley to go like pitch this to this group. We're supposed to be working on Crossworlds, and they're like, you got to pitch this idea to them. And Matt Hawley stops me in the hall and says, Jeff, you cannot go into that meeting. I refuse to put up a deck in front of the team where the first slide says monetized shooter.
Mm-hmm.
They'll hate that. And that's not the spirit of who we are as, creative develop. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. Like, well, no one was supposed to see this deck anyway. You guys were all looking over my shoulder. And he's like, you need to put a name on it. I'm like, it's Overwatch. Like right on the spot, I said the name was Overwatch. And where that had come from was when we were working on Titan, I was really angry about this. We did this fake, I did not do this. Another leader on the team did this, of this fake, like we're going to put up whiteboards and everyone gets to vote for their favorite name for Titan.
Mm-hmm.
But the person who did it already had a name in mind for the game and just kept pushing towards that name.
Yeah.
And the thing that got the most votes was Overwatch. Overwatch in Titan was like a police group, essentially. But somebody had written Overwatch on that board and it got the most votes. So I basically named the game Overwatch to like high five my team and kind of middle finger.
Yeah.
Like, don't act like it's a democracy when it's not.
Yeah. So it's a middle finger.
Yeah.
So Overwatch, and then the rest is history. So what in that slide deck is that? In that slide deck, did you already have a kind of crawl, walk, run idea of the way this would be developed?
So my deck was terrible. People actually, there's a thing called a Jeff deck, which is it's always gray with black writing, and then the default like PowerPoint blue shapes because I just don't bother making it look good.
Yeah.
Besides dragging Arnold Sang's art, desecrating it into my deck. We had this amazing game designer on the Overwatch team, a guy named Jeremy Craig, who's now actually game directing a game over at Bonfire. Jeremy, not only was he a great game designer, but he had the ability to sell things better than anybody else visually. So Jeremy took my shitty deck, and then we had lots more like creative brainstorms, and we thought through the game of Overwatch a lot more. And then he made this gorgeous pitch deck that we pitched. We first had to go through the Blizzard production and game directors for them to approve it and give it their thumbs up. Then we had to go through the Blizzard executives. Then we had to go through Activision.
Mm-hmm.
And in that deck, because we had to speak to schedule, we had to speak to two things that were tough to speak to. One, we had to speak to schedule, and we came up with this concept of crawl, walk, run. We had identified the reason Titan failed is we just tried to run. We tried to come up with the next World of Warcraft. But if you think about World of Warcraft, it had Warcraft 1, 2, and 3 to build upon to even get to the point where people gave a shit enough about that world to want to live in the world of Warcraft. So the idea was that instead of trying to cut right to World of Warcraft, let's try to honor Warcraft 1, essentially. So this first game is just to establish that there's a universe you might give a shit about.
Mm-hmm.
We also knew that the time frame we were given of 2 years, there was no way to create a compelling PvE experience. So we just kind of randomly put dates in a slide of crawl, walk, run, thinking it was aspirational, and really we were just trying to save ourselves. Like, don't cancel us. This team can make something great. The other part that we had to talk to too was like a mobile strategy. Like at that time, it was like everything has to be also on mobile, which I think is the dumbest thing ever. And
Yeah.
so literally what we did is this was Jeremy's brilliant part. We had a picture with all the boxes, and then one of them is like a tablet with just a fucking Photoshop of, Arnold's art on it. And we're
Yeah.
like, and also it'll be
Mobile.
on mobile.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
But I think this crawl, walk, run idea is really nice. So that the initial idea is you would have basically a shooter with all these different characters, all these heroes, and then the walk would be the PvE version of that co-op. And then if people really fall in love with the world, then you build a big MMO around it.